Awesome. So, hi everybody, welcome. My name's Amelia. I am your resident artist for Watercolor Snacks. If you're new to joining one of our live streams, welcome. And I know we have a couple of people returning, so it's good to see you again. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into our project. So we can go over to my computer screen over here. I'm just going to clear my message there. And I can do a quick little intro of the materials that we have, just in case you need to grab some things. I'm working with the materials that came in the Watercolor Snacks Winter 2024 box. If you don't have that, that is totally fine. You can bring whatever materials you have, and you can follow along, or you can just do your own thing and work on your own project with everybody in the group. So the paper that I have, which I already have prepared for our bookmarks, is the Bockingford traditional watercolor paper. This is a hot press, which means the paper surface is going to be really smooth. You're not going to have that sort of bumpy watercolor texture. So I pulled a couple sheets off of here. And just really quick, in case you want to prep your paper if you haven't yet, while I'm going over the rest of the supplies. I actually have two sheets so that I can continue working while one is drying. So I'm just going to sit one off to the side. But I divided up my paper into these bookmarks are going to be 2 inches across and 8 inches down. So you can measure as many that will fit on your paper. I did the 2 inches across long ways because I figured I could fit more bookmarks on the page that way. So just measure every 2 inches and make a mark, and then you can divide your paper that way. And I left mine all as one sheet so that as I do my design, I can cut it out later. And each bookmark will look a little bit different. So if you haven't done that yet, you can go ahead and prep your paper now. And then the other materials I have are the Daniel Smith watercolor tubes. So there's 3 colors that came in the winter box. So that is the Prussian blue, phthalo turquoise, and the Hansa yellow deep. So I have those 3. I have a little bit already on my palette, but I'm probably gonna put a little more on there. I tend to leave my watercolors on there and then reactivate them, so I'm wasting them less often. But this is the palette that came with the set, and then I have the 2 brushes that came with the kit, and as well as 2 containers of water, which are off screen here, but I have 1 container of clean water and then a container for washing off my brush. I also have the uh, graphite water soluble colored pencils. So I have those to work with as well. And then the Faber-Castell pen, which I can't remember if I already mentioned or not, but if I didn't, I definitely managed to go over it there. A couple extra things, again, if you don't have them, that's okay. But I have some ribbon so that for the bookmark, I can add a little bit of ribbon as a decoration, but you can use twine or string, or you can leave it out completely. It's up to you, but I grabbed some of that. I have a hole puncher for punching a hole in the top so we can put the ribbon on. But you could also just use scissors to poke a hole in the top just as easily. You can cut a little hole in the top. And I have scissors for that. And then I mentioned in the class prep posts a couple of resist materials, which if you haven't done resist before, it's pretty easy. If you have any kind of plain crayon, you can use any color crayon, but I have a white crayon, and then just regular table salt. So we'll use that in just a little bit. But that's everything that I have with me. And again, if you don't have all of the supplies, that's okay. Just work with what you have. So as you probably realize if you didn't read the prep post before, we're going to be making watercolor bookmarks and just kind of creating an abstract design. So we can go ahead and just kind of jump into creating. And as we go, I'll talk a little bit. I'll go over some basic watercolor techniques for painting with the watercolor tubes, and maybe just some different things that I might try. This can be very experimental, so you don't really have to have any kind of particular idea in mind. But you can also, if you want to do designs, intentional designs, drawings or writing, you can do that as well. But I'm just grabbing some color. I have a little bit of this phthalo turquoise, and I'm just laying down some color on the paper. So the technique I'm using right now is called wet on dry. That means that I'm painting the watercolor directly onto my dry paper. And then another technique you can do is wet on wet, and that's when you get your paper wet first, and then apply the color onto the wet paper. So again, I don't really have any kind of particular design or technique in mind because I just kind of want the colors and the paints to do their own thing as I paint. And I think this project is really good for if you just want to practice technique and play around with the material, but with a little less pressure than trying to come up with something really specific. And you can just have fun with the textures that you get with the painting. And I'm interested in maybe trying some things like dripping water into the paint and just letting that dry and seeing what happens. Because the watercolor is going to disperse wherever the water touches the paint. So you're going to get these kind of almost like snowflake looking effects. And you don't have to try to fit within the lines that are drawn on the paper either. You can go across multiple boxes and squares on your paper. So don't be afraid to just paint really big and cover a lot of the space. You can definitely do that as well. And I'm going to take some water from my clean water jar. That's why I have the two. So I have one that always is clean and clear and doesn't have any other paint in it. And now I'm going to do a little bit of the wet on wet. So I'm just putting clear plain water on the paper first to get the paper wet. And then let's see, I think I'm going to do a little bit of this yellow color. And if the colors blend in together, for this project, that's okay. So you don't have to necessarily wait for one part to dry before you can work on another, because this is really just very loose and improvisational. So you can kind of do whatever strikes your inspiration in the moment. And I might try maybe some splatter techniques. So I got some paint on my brush and now I'm just gently tapping it with my finger, and now I'm getting some really interesting speckles. And because the paper is already wet, the paint is sort of blooming out into the other color, which is really fun. I think it's a really pretty texture. I've always really liked when watercolor has that effect. I think it's something that's also kind of unique about the material. And we can also work in layers. So I'm just kind of putting down the first initial layer of color and texture on the paper. So, you can always go back in. You don't have to try to do everything on the first layer that you put on the paper. I think sometimes it's just really nice to not have any particular project in mind, but allow yourself to have fun with the materials that you're using. This is a really good time just to play and experiment with the different, um, you know, the ways that the paint interacts with each other or interacts with other colors, interacts with the paper. And it's a really fun time to just kind of see what happens when you try things that maybe are unexpected. So I actually already have a pre-mixed green over here. So this is the ultramarine blue and the Hansa yellow deep together. Um, so you can also mix colors together. But I think I'm going to kind of just go across. And I want it to be really watery for this because I think I'm going to use the salt technique to create some interesting textures. Okay, so to use the salt resist technique, you want your paint to be a little bit watery, but not super puddly. You don't want to have so much paint and water on your paper that it's forming little puddles and areas with a lot of paint on it. Just enough that it still has a shine. You can tell that it's still wet. And then you just take, like I was saying, regular table salt and sprinkle it on to your paper. And what's going to happen is the salt is going to absorb the liquid that's on the paper. So it takes a little while because it does have to dry. You don't want to put too much salt either, just enough for it to start to soak up that paint. But when it dries, you will just brush the salt off of the paper, and then it will create a really interesting, almost sometimes I think it looks a little bit like snowflakes. It actually will look a little bit like when you splatter paint or use water in your paint as it's drying. It'll create a similar effect, but it'll be a little more delicate and more detailed, which is pretty cool. But hopefully this is a really fun way for you to, on a Friday night, you're relaxing with some paints and, thinking about maybe what you'll use your bookmark in, or if you're giving your bookmark away as a gift. It's always a really nice, easy handmade project that you get to enjoy making because you get to work with the art materials and have fun painting, and then you get to pass it on to someone else, which is really fun. I'm gonna switch over to my smaller brush now. I'm just gonna go in and add in some little bits of yellow in here. What's cool is that even though the yellow is a lighter color, because everything is still wet, this yellow paint's going to start to push away some of the green that's already there. So it's going to mix a little bit because it's picking up some of the wet green paint, but it will still show through and be nice and bright and yellow, which I think is really fun. I think what's also great about doing something that's abstract is there's really no right or wrong way to do it. And just kind of however you are inspired to put marks down on the paper is the right way to do it, which I think is super fun. I'm gonna put a little more yellow on here. And if you saw how much of the yellow paint I put on, I usually just squeeze a little tiny bit because this color is very vibrant. And these Daniel Smith paints are really nice because they have that really beautiful, vibrant pigment to it. So a little bit will go a long way. And you want to add water to your paint just by the nature of the material itself, but making sure that you aren't over squeezing your tube onto the palette will help you also make your paint last longer, and that not as much of your paint goes to waste. I think I may have told, I can't remember if I told this story um, in previous live streams or if maybe I was telling another class that I was teaching, but when I was younger, I used watercolor paint tubes for the first time. I'd always used the pans because I think those are usually with younger kids, you use the pans of watercolor paint because they're less messy, and they're a little easier to work with because you can kind of take them anywhere to work with it. You don't have to worry about, well, it's also a little less expensive, especially if you're just getting the crafty kind of watercolor paints. So I had always used that when I was younger, and I had never encountered tubes of watercolor paint. I'd only ever encountered tubes of acrylic paint or tempera paint before. So my friend's sister, who is about 10 years older than us, so she, I think, was in high school. She had a set of just, I think, one of those art kits that you get that has different materials in it, and it had watercolor tubes. And I remember my friend and I were using her paints, and I was very confused. I was like, why is this paint so in such a tiny tube, and why is it coming out so thick? And then I realized it was watercolor paint, and I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I always thought that was funny. Now that I am working with these materials so often, it was probably about this size. And I just squeezed out so much because I was thinking that it was like acrylic paint or something else that you would use a lot of. So it makes me laugh to think about that, but also gives me a lot of, I guess, empathy for maybe people who haven't encountered this type of material before, because you wouldn't necessarily know that you don't need a whole lot. So most of the time you need to squeeze out a lot of paint to have enough to put on your paper. So I just think that's a funny story to me to look back on. Okay, so I have this page kind of filled up, but I need to let it dry. So I'm gonna go ahead and start on my second piece. If you're not finished though, that's okay. You can take as much time as you like. And you can, be as detailed or as loose as you want. This is your project, so, it's really whatever you want it to ultimately look like is how it's meant to look. So take your time with that. Or if you want to make a whole lot of bookmarks, you could also be working on a couple pages at a time. Maybe you want to make a certain number for a group of friends or people you work with or go to school with or something like that. So you could certainly work on more than one. But I want to use my crayon now, just to show you how cool the effect is. So you won't see the marks that I'm making on my paper because it's the white crayon on white paper, but you'll see when I put the paint over it what happens. You'll be able to see all the marks. If anyone dyes Easter eggs or has done any kind of dyeing project before, you may have used crayons on dyeing eggs or something else like that. It's sort of the same effect that you'll get, that the wax is going to resist the water of the watercolor, so the crayon marks will show through that when you put it on the paper, which is pretty cool. The only downside of using the crayon is that it'll make it a little harder if you want to go over it with a pen, because it'll also resist the ink of the pen. So just be mindful of how you think you're going to create your layers, because that might affect something that you want to do later. And you don't have to only use white. You can also use other colors. I just would recommend thinking about the color that is going underneath and the color that's going on top, how light or dark the color is. So for example, if I'm using a dark blue crayon and then I use the phthalo green or the Prussian blue on top of that, it won't really show through. Now if I use yellow underneath of a dark blue, it'll show through, but it won't be as vibrant yellow. The green or blue will lay on top and kind of make it a little darker. So probably I think what might work the best other than the white crayon is using a dark color underneath of a lighter color, or just, being okay with it possibly changing colors from what you originally put. So I'm just going to put a few little designs on here. I think that'll be a good place to end with that. Oh, and also if you have the watercolor pencils, that's also, you could use that on here too. So I'm just gonna create some designs. I'm trying to kind of make it look like scales. And if you want to do this design too, but you want to be a little more deliberate about the shapes, you can definitely do that. I think it's really fun to draw repeating patterns, which are also called motifs. So that's another word for a repeating pattern, is a motif. I think it can be really fun to draw them. It can be kind of like if you've ever done Zen doodles or anything like that, it's really fun because, you can kind of get lost in drawing and you don't really have to think too much about, what it is that you're putting on the paper, just kind of letting it take over and kind of getting into the zone. So that can be really fun too, if you want to just do some fun motifs as well. Trying out a yellow crayon. So we can see a little bit of both. We can see what happens when you use a darker blue crayon and a lighter yellow crayon, and what the effect will look like. I kind of had pictured when I was thinking about this project that I would let the colors all kind of flow and blend together on the paper. So I think I'm going to do that on this page. So I think I'm probably going to put some water down on my paper and then just kind of dab some color into different areas. And then I think I'm going to put some salt on to give a little texture to it too. So now that I have some interesting different marks and patterns on my paper, think the first thing I'm going to do is actually kind of go over this area and activate this watercolor pencil first, just so I can kind of lighten that area up a little bit when I am going over with my other colors, because it's, as you can see, this is a grayish color. It's actually a warm gray, it has a little bit of red in it. But it's a gray nonetheless, so I want to give that a chance to kind of dilute a little bit, so that it doesn't muddy my colors too much. I want to let this one dry actually a little bit, but the good news is that my other one has started to dry enough that I think I can go back and work on it. So while that one's drying, kind of switch back and forth. I think this actually might be dry enough to start to scrape away some of the salt. So my advice, anytime that you put something on your paper that you need to remove, is to take a paper towel and wrap your finger in the paper towel and then rub that across your paper, rather than just your finger. And the reason for that is that our fingers have oils in them, that they can sometimes smudge what you're working on in a way that you don't want it to smudge. But it can also start to break down your paper over time. Now, if you're not really worried about archiving your work, and you're just playing around and having fun, then you don't have to worry about it too much. But thinking about the longevity of your artwork, and in a couple decades when you look back on your work, and you don't want it to have oil stains or marks or signs of age and wear. That's part of the more archival, I guess, practice of keeping your work looking nice and neat for years and years. So that's why I recommend that. But again, if you're just playing and you're not too worried about, preserving your work for a really long time, then by all means, go ahead and just brush it away with your hand. So, but I think it's a helpful tip. So you can kind of see on here where I had the salt on the paper, the spots where it really soaked up some of the paint. It's very delicate and subtle. And depending on how much water, how much paint, and how much salt you use, you'll get a different result every time, which is pretty cool, I think. But it's neat that you get that variation and texture in your painting and your drawing. So I think I'm going to just start to draw some patterns or motifs across the top of this. And you can add whatever you want. You can add words or little drawings or symbols, really anything that strikes your fancy. But now the librarian side of me is going to come out and mention that anytime that you're making art materials that go inside of books, just take care that, one, it's totally dry before you put it in the book. And two, that you're not using any materials that will lift off the paper, or smudge or damage the book pages in any way. So I think I really like these pencils for activating with water, but I think if you're going to use these to draw on top of your bookmark, before you put it in a book, maybe put some either clear masking tape over it, or if you have access to a laminator, you could laminate it. But just be careful that the material isn't going to rub off of your bookmark and get onto your book. So that was my library PSA. Just to take care, If it's your own book and you don't really mind, that's okay. But if you're using a library book, just make sure that you're not getting smudges all over the library books, so that other people can enjoy the books too. I will probably, for some of these, I have a little laminator, so I will probably laminate some of these before I use them in any books. I think I'll probably give these to my friends that I work with at the library, because we all do read. So I think that would be really a nice way also to let other people enjoy bookmarks. And I'm curious if anybody else is planning to use your bookmarks for yourself, or if you're making them for friends, or anything like that. You're welcome to share that too. Or if you're working on something with a really interesting design, or anything like that. I'd be curious to hear about that too. Oh, cool. So Lori, you're gonna give yours away. Nice. I like that. I'm also curious if everyone here is a reader, if you have the time to sit down and read books, or if you like reading physical books, or if you prefer audiobooks. I personally really like audiobooks because it allows me to multitask, and I feel like I'm able to concentrate a little better, because a lot of time when I sit down to read, I tend to get distracted or start thinking about something else. Um, oh, that's really great, Lori. It's reading your comment now that you'll use them, and oh, seal them with wax. Oh, that's a cool idea. I like that. I'm not familiar with Dorland's wax. It's not something I've used before, or at least I haven't heard of it. That sounds pretty awesome. I'm curious about how that works. If it's something that you paint on, or if it's like a wax seal where you put a stamp in. Something I like about this angle brush is that I'm able to get really detailed lines as well as really thick lines, which is pretty cool. Um, it's nice to have a variety of brush shapes. It allows you to, get detailed and have broad strokes all with one brush. Oh, okay. So the Dorland's wax is a seal. They use a paper towel to put on the watercolor. That is so cool. I'm interested in learning more about that and maybe trying it out. That's so cool. I love when I learn something too. Yeah, I know there are some pretty cool I actually saw a video of somebody making putting a glaze over their watercolor painting. Um and just like if you've ever seen somebody varnishing an oil painting, that's like a seal that you can put over top of a painting, and it protects it. Again, thinking about archival um methods to make them last a little longer. Um, so that's also a technique you could do, but I've never heard of anyone varnishing a watercolor painting before that, so I was intrigued to see that. Oh, okay. So the wax is like a glaze. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, Rodney, you're gonna seal yours. That's good. Or
Amelia, you're beating me to all these comments.
oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. No, listen, you do you. Go for it.
I like making these dots. I think they kind of look like sprinkles. Actually, that would be a really cute bookmark. Would be to make it look like there's colorful sprinkles all over the design. Yeah, I think actually if you're able to laminate these, that might help them lay a little more flat. Um, but if you also press them like when they're dry, if you put them underneath of a heavy book or press them inside of a book, or put them under heavy weight, that will help flatten them out. You can also, when they're dry, on the back of the paper, if you get that wet, and then again, not super wet, but kind of damp, and then put a paper towel over top of it, and then again put something heavy on it, like a stack of books or something. That will help it flatten out too. So you can definitely try that and see if that helps make them a little flatter, but they'll flatten up over time a little more. The other option is you could tape your paper down, and then that way um it'll lay flat as it's drying, so it'll curl up less because it's curling because it's not attached to anything. So when it gets wet, paper naturally wants to curl up. So it makes sense that it's doing that. But those are some ideas that you could try. Um, if you don't want it to do that. So I'm gonna do the wet on wet technique now. I think I'm just gonna get really abstract with the colors. Okay. And now I think let's just start putting some colors on, see what happens. So you can see how that design is really coming through underneath, which is pretty awesome. This might be a cool technique to use if you are maybe painting a night sky scene or something like that. Could be really cool. So you could put stars in the sky, and that would show through really well. Now I'm adding a fair bit of water just because I want the paint to really blend into each other. But be careful you don't use too much water, just because again it's going to start to puddle in places that you might not want it to puddle. So just take care not do too overboard with it, because it will also kind of make a mess. where you actually gave me a cool idea because you mentioned using paper towels, and then I was like, oh yeah. So another cool thing you can do is, paper towel. And sometimes paper towels have really cool designs on them. You can use them to kind of blot up some areas of paint, and you can almost create like a cloud texture like that. Um, you might have to kind of rotate it a little bit to move the spots that are um, getting a lot of paint on it, because then you'll start to spread the paint around. You might not want that. But you can sort of blot up the paint and create some interesting textures that way too. This one kind of makes me think a little bit of a sun and a moon pattern, so I might go in and kind of make that a little more enhanced. It kind of makes me think of like a sunrise sky and then a night sky.
Amelia, we are looking good. We're about halfway through this session.
Cool, thank you. So I don't want these to meet in the middle. I think I want to go back in with my paper towel technique. Yeah, I really enjoy doing paintings where I don't really have a plan, because then I start to get creative with ideas that I hadn't really thought of before, which I think is a really great exercise. So if you're ever feeling like you have kind of an art block or you're not really sure what to work on, but you want to just create something, this is a good go-to project. And then, you have your bookmarks at the end that you can use or give away as you like. So I always think that's really fun. I was watching something earlier today that someone said, I think they were talking about cooking, but a person said that children, when they are doing something creative or trying something new, their um, fear doesn't outweigh their curiosity. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is such a good way to put art making, especially if you are um, not a kid anymore, but you still want to be creating art. I think a lot of the time, and I noticed this because I also teach college level students, I've noticed that some of them are so, I guess, worried about doing it right that they sometimes overthink the process or um and not just these students, but I think a lot of people who are maybe trying art out as an older person or adult, um and they feel like intimidated by it. But I just really liked the way that was put, not to let your fear outweigh your curiosity, because there's no rule that says you only get to try making art once and you have to do it right the one time you do it. That's kind of like the whole thing about art making, is that you get to have as many tries as you want, and you know, the discovery process is all about making mistakes. So it's one of those things like you should be curious and not afraid when you're making art. So I just thought that was really cool. I think I'm gonna start kind of putting that quote into things. Um, 'Cause I thought it was really nice. And a good thing to keep in mind anytime you're feeling maybe nervous or uh, scared to do something. Just remember to stay curious. I actually really like how this is coming out. And it'll be interesting to see how it looks when I cut the two bookmarks apart. I'm curious to see that effect when it happens. I predicted that it would be harder to see that that yellow color underneath of the blue, but I think it actually looks fine. I think it looks pretty cool. It showed through really well. Um, so I guess these crayons are just, I mean, they're regular Crayola crayons, but I think maybe they're a little nicer than ones that I've used before for this technique. This is a brand new set of crayons, and then the other set I was using is I think from the 50s or 60s. That might explain why these are a little stronger than the ones I was using before, because they're just newer. So that would make sense. Okay, so oh right, I want to put a little bit of salt on here. So I just want to get a little texture there. We'll let that dry. I'm gonna put the lid back on, right? Okay. So let's check on this and see how it's doing. Still a little wet, but I think I can go back in and maybe I'll go in with some crayon on top just because I have them and I think it might be fun to add some other colors. The cool thing too is that, you know, if you want to do this resist technique, you can work in layers. So you can put a layer of watercolor down and then do a layer of crayon and then add a totally new color on top and just see what happens. Actually, I'm curious about what might happen if I use a white crayon on top, if that will preserve the color underneath. So let's see what happens. Over here, I haven't used this one yet. Okay, so let's try. I'm really curious to see if it will have any kind of effect if I add the white on top of another color. So we'll see. Need a little more paint. So I'm going to move this over a little bit just to kind of demonstrate how I'm working with these 2 cups of water now. So when I have a color on my brush and I want to switch to another color, now that you can see my paint water is nice and green, so it's, you know, it's got color to it where if I were to put this on my paper or mix it into another color, it might start to dilute the other color that I'm mixing into. So what I do is wash all the paint off my brush. I'll usually wipe it off on the side, kind of like this. That's just a habit that I have now. I kind of do it without thinking, but it gets a little more of the water off so it's not dripping. And then I always keep a paper towel underneath of my cups, and then I just give it a good swipe across the paper towel. So you can see I have a little bit of a yellow spot over here from where I've been wiping my brush off. And then that's when I'll go in and grab the clean water to activate my paint. So that's a tip for you if you're new to kind of the process of putting your brush or using your brush with more than one color. It's just a really handy way to do that without putting color into your clean water cup. So it's a couple extra steps, but it definitely helps with that. And pretty cool. So putting the white colored or white crayon on top of the blue paint, it kind of has that blue color showing through, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, if you wanted to also, you could, with your crayon underneath, you could write something. Like I wrote on my example, I wrote read on there, but you could put anything you want. If you want to do book related, you could put I love books or reading is awesome or whatever you want to put on there. That is, like a fun book related quote. Or speaking of quotes, you could put a quote from one of your favorite books. That might be fun to do too. Um, so there's, a lot that you can do with making it your own kind of design. I like using watercolor for the bookmarks because once it's dry, it typically won't reactivate or flake or crack in any way like some other paints might. Acrylic is plasticky, so it doesn't really crack so much, but if it gets bent or something, if you weren't able to laminate or seal this in some way, the watercolor is going to stay pretty stable. It's not going to come off and rub off onto the pages of your book, which is good. So this is a good material for this type of project. I think I'm gonna do a little bit of drawing on this one, so I have to give myself a little space. I think I want to draw a sun and a moon over here. A little sun, and then I'll flip it upside down. Draw. Moon. I really liked drawing suns and moons when I was a little kid. And the moon always had a little pet star, and the sun always had a little pet cloud whenever I drew them. I thought that was cute. And so it's like a fun thing that I like to go back and draw again. Might fill in. Now this pen is water resistant, so you can use it with watercolor, but it's waterproof. So you can use it with watercolors, but I would advise letting it dry all the way before you go in with watercolor again, because before it's totally dry, sometimes it doesn't, it'll get lifted back up with your watercolor. So just give it some time to dry before you add any kind of wet media with it. I'm curious if anyone else is using any kind of resist techniques. If you're using crayons, or if you have masking fluid or any other kind of thing that you're trying, or if anyone else is trying the salt technique. I'm curious if you guys are giving that a go. Maybe if it's your first time trying one of those techniques, how it's going for you.
Lori says she did some salt, so that's cool.
Cool. I can't wait to see how it came out. Oh, something else cool that you guys might want to try is when your watercolors are dry, if you did a technique kind of like this, where you just let the watercolor kind of free flow and create any kind of like unexpected shape. What you could do when it's dry is with your pen, you can either trace over the shape that it created, or you can see if you can turn that shape into something else, which is an exercise that you can do with drawing if you just draw a blobby shape and see if you can turn it into something else. But you could also do that with watercolor blobs, which might be extra fun to try because that's really unpredictable. So, you have to be really creative to try to find a recognizable shape out of it. So that might be fun. Switch on to this one. Let's see. I think these feel pretty dry. Ooh, I see Rodney's comment about putting don't let fear outweigh your creativity on the bookmark. That's such a good idea. I think I'm gonna try that. So I think I'm gonna use this one here because I think it's the lightest. Actually, this one might work too. Just gonna bend it a little. You can also, if your paper's curling and it's dry, you can just gently bend it a little bit, and that will train it to kind of move back the way it needs to. What's so funny is I feel like that quote sounds so poignant. And I was watching like an infomercial for cookware. And that's where I heard the quote. And I just think that's so funny. Um, that that came out of that. But I think the sentiment, no matter where it came from, uh, I think it's still really good quote. So even though it was to sell cookware, I think that I got something out of it. I have to be quiet while I'm writing because if I talk and write at the same time, I'll start to write what I'm saying. I'll have to, I think I'll have to punch my hole up at the top here so that I don't accidentally poke a hole through my writing. If you're writing on your bookmarks, what are some things that you guys are writing on top of them? I'm curious. Or if anyone went with a book quote, I'm curious. Right, let's switch back over to this one. This still isn't quite dry yet, so I don't want to smudge it, but I think I'm gonna use crayons to color in my little sun and moon now. I feel like I haven't used just plain crayons in a long time, but they're really fun to color with. Yeah, be careful a little bit with this too. If your marker's not dry all the way, it will start to smudge a little. I got a little smudge on the eye. It's really hard to see, but I can tell that it's smudged a little. So just I would say before if you work with the pen, maybe set it aside for an hour or so. I know that's a long time, but making sure it's totally dry before you do too much on top of it in terms of adding layers, because I think it just needs a lot of time to dry. So depending on how much ink you use, you might need to let it rest for a while to get really dry. And sometimes that's a big part of art making, is just having patience. It can be really hard. Um, but you know, it helps to have the outcome that you're looking for. So if you don't have crayons, you could also use colored pencils for this. If you wanted to layer colored pencil on top and you have them handy, you could also use those. Or you could just keep adding layers of watercolor on top. And you can use your detail brush like I was using to paint the hearts. You could use the detail brush to add more designs, motifs, patterns, all that stuff.
We got a good question from Rodney. Amelia, do you use your middle finger to better control your drawing and lettering? I'm curious how you hold your pen and your crayon. Can you demo?
Oh, yeah, that is a good question. So this is my pencil grip and pen grip. So yeah, I do use my middle finger to kind of guide the pen. Sometimes I'll switch up my grip. Sometimes I'll kind of use my thumb to, if I'm trying to do more detail, I'll kind of use my thumb to guide or hold the pen and then use my fingers to guide it. Or if I'm doing something really detailed, then I'll hold it sort of between these two fingers. But if I'm doing like if I'm drawing on the side, I switch my grip to this so that sometimes I'll use my pointer finger more to guide the pencil or pen that I'm using. Looking to see if I have any other scrap paper handy, just to kind of demonstrate how I write. I have a recipe paper here. I'll draw on the back of my recipe. But yeah, when I write, yeah, I'll hold my drawing tool like this, and then trying to think what to write. So that's how I, do my writing. And then, like I said, if I'm drawing with the side of the tool, I'll usually hold it kind of like this. It depends on what it is, because different things have different weights. But yeah, I'll switch up my grip, depending, or if I'm doing something very detailed, I might do that. But yeah, that's how I hold my pen. I'm also always very curious how other people hold their pens. I know there are a lot of different unique grips that people have. And I think that's always an interesting question. So thank you, Rodney. That was an awesome question. Um, and just a fun thing to kind of share. It's not something I really think about much because I do so much drawing and writing by hand that it's just, I'm not even paying attention to it anymore. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so I think I'm gonna start cutting these out. I think even though this one needs a little more time to dry, I might just leave this one, but I'm gonna start you might not be able to see your pencil lines very clearly anymore, but that's okay. Even if they're not perfectly how you measured them in the beginning, just get as close as you can to them. Um, so here's one of my bookmarks just by itself. I think it looks pretty cool. It makes me think a little bit of like a mermaid or fish uh pattern or motif. So if you're gonna laminate or seal your bookmarks, you might want to save this step for after you do that. But if you want to add a ribbon or something decorative and you have a hole punch, I'd say find, you can measure if you want to be precise, but I'm just gonna kind of use my eye to find the middle, and I'm not gonna go too far down, but you also want to leave enough space so that the hole that you punch isn't right up at the very top. Um, and you can save these little um you can save these little uh paper bits if you want, because you could use those in a collage later. Or if you're a member of Art Journal Snacks, you could probably use it for your art journal as well. That might be a fun way to recycle. Um, and then as far as how long the ribbon is, there's really no right or wrong way to do it. I just kind of just estimate how long I think I want it to be. And I leave a little bit, I make it a little bit longer because you'll lose some length when you add your knot. But I didn't do anything too fancy with the ribbon. I just um, I tied it like that. It's a little uneven. That's okay. I didn't tie it too tight because I don't want to pull the paper and rip it. But I did do a double knot like that. I tried to pull it tight without putting too much pressure on the paper. So you could just leave them like this. You could trim them to be a little shorter. Or you could do the trick where if you open up your scissors, be careful when you're doing this. But if you use your thumb to kind of press down on the ribbon and pull it, you can get a little curl. So that's always fun. But yeah, I think you have to do it a certain way. So you have to do it on the underside of the ribbon. And then you can get some little curls. So that's a little fancy. If you want to have a little bit of a fancy top, like that, or you can just leave them, or you could skip doing a ribbon altogether. Um, but I think it's just a fun little detail. The other thing you could do with your bookmarks is if you don't like the sharp edges, you can just take your scissors and round them out just a little bit. Just trim off the corners. If you have a corner cutting tool, you can also use that. Sometimes people have them if they do crafts or scrapbooking. Um, so I actually have one. I'm not sure where it is. But the scissors work just as well. Just takes a little more patience. That. That. Mine are a little crooked, but that's okay. I mean, it's a handmade bookmark, so I think it comes with the territory that it's not going to look like it was made by a machine. It has that really nice handmade feel. But this is, you can have a nice bookmark. You can write a message on the back, or if you're giving it to somebody, you can do a nice, a nice little uh quote or something like that, which is really fun. Yeah, so I'm gonna continue cutting out my bookmarks. But Lee, I think if anybody wants to share, now might be a good time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, perfect timing. Let's see here. If anyone, okay, great. Lori's gonna send a pic. Wonderful. If anyone wants to share, you can raise your actual hand or your digital hand. And I will get you on screen here if you so choose. And it's totally fine if you're just busy working or just want to enjoy yourself on this Friday evening.
That's okay too. If you really focus on their bookmark project, that's fine. Oh, I'm really happy with how this one came out. Oh, it's so cute.
I'll share, but they're not cut out.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
because
okay.
I'm gonna seal them. Oh,
Sure.
I forgot where I put them.
All right.
It's very relatable.
I really need to slow down when I paint. I don't know what's going on with my ADHD.
It's okay, I'm the same. Wow, those are beautiful.
Thank you. I didn't know what to do, so
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love all the different motifs and designs and especially like the one that looks a little bit like it's a stack of books.
it's a bookshelf
That's awesome.
because I didn't know what to do, and that was the last one, and I was all out of ideas.
No, I think that was good.
Thank you.
I hope you had fun. Did you enjoy kind of just doing abstract work?
Yeah, I did. I'm really into dots,
Yeah,
so
that's
thank
great.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. I also really love dots. I didn't do too many. I did some, but yeah, they're really fun. You just
Yeah,
have
they
fun.
are. They're relaxing, kind of wind you down. And
Yeah,
I needed winding down.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that helps on a Friday evening. I feel like I needed that too.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
That's great. Thanks for sharing, Lori. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to share? Thank you, Lori, for sharing. And if you're still working and you want to post it later on Mix, also fine. Oh, I heard something. Hello?
Oh.
Oh, all right. Okay. I'm going to go back to overhead camera. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep kind of just cutting apart my bookmarks and then oh, it looks like Rodney has an interesting question
Hmm.
about if anyone can show their sealing techniques.
Let me, Lee, is it okay if I show the Dorland's wax thing?
Yeah, sure.
All righty, I have the jar here. I've been doing pup portraits, so I need to seal them.
There you go.
Dorland's wax medium.
And then
And
what's the brand there? Jacquard, is that the brand?
yes, Jacquard.
Jacquard. There you go.
There you go. And so as you can see, it's not like a candle. I get paper towel in my hand and scoop some out, and I just rub it on. Rub it on. It seals it. It even brightens the colors up too. So
That's neat.
that's it. So there you go.
Thank you. That's so neat. I haven't heard of that before, but I'm very intrigued to check it out and maybe give it a try.
Yeah, that's a great. I never heard of that before. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Also, it looks like Rodney was curious if it dries hard. Does it harden as it dries, or does it stay soft?
I leave it dry for 24 hours because it is soft, but it does, hang on one second, this little postcard that I'm sending a little postcard. It feels like the paper. You can barely feel the wax on it.
Oh,
And that's with ink too. So, yeah.
very neat.
But this gets mailed just like this. The wax seals it, so if it rains, then it has protection.
That's smart.
Very smart.
Yeah. Yeah, because yeah, watercolor and rain don't mix very well. So yeah, that's great. And I was gonna say, Lori, I've seen some of your pup portraits that you've posted, and they're really good and they're really cute. I've been enjoying.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Most of the time they are passed away.
Oh yeah.
So when I get a commission, I tell them I want a picture that, because my friend, hers had cancer in the face, and I said, no, because every time you look at that, you're going to remember the suffering. I
Mhm.
want to go through your pictures, and I'll pick the one that that will work out best.
Yeah.
And
I think that's
and
smart.
they're neutral tone, and I don't like to paint neutral. That's why my backgrounds are so weird.
Well, that's okay. So you're adding a little bit of pizzazz to the background, which I
Yeah,
think,
just for color.
yeah. Yeah, they look really nice.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure,
Thank
yeah,
you.
and I'm sure it means a lot to the people that you paint them for too.
Yeah, it does. They especially like when the eyes are captured perfectly, you know.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
That's
thank
really,
you.
yeah, you're welcome.
That's great. Wonderful. Wonderful. See, Friday night streams are great. You
Yeah,
know, great learning from not only us, but other people that are joining us. Fantastic.
yeah. I learned a whole bunch of stuff tonight from everybody. And yeah, it was just awesome. And now I have a whole bunch of bookmarks here, which I think I'm going to run through my little laminator. And then I think I'm gonna give these out to my friends that I work with, just as a surprise gift. Or I also work with, I have a team of student employees. I might leave it out for them, so that they can, have some bookmarks and just something fun. So, yeah. I'm just gonna, we have a couple minutes left in case anybody wants to share last minute. I'm just gonna keep kind of hole punching my bookmarks and getting them ready.
I thought this was a very good session, very productive.
Thanks. I think so too. I hope that people will, if they're still working on their bookmarks, will share on Mix. 'Cause I'd really like to see what everyone made. Well, have a good night, Lori. Thank you again for sharing.
This is great. While you're doing that, I'm gonna go back to the forward-facing camera for you, Amelia, and have you say some final thoughts and sign off. How's that sound?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for hanging out with me on this Friday evening. I had a lot of fun just playing with materials and chatting about art and telling some, fun art stories. But I hope that everybody learned something new, or at least, you know, if not from me, just from making something with the materials. So I hope that you guys have a great rest of your night. And if you feel so inclined, share what you made on Mix, and I will catch you guys next time. So,
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us.